you see, and thank you all for coming. It's really it's always special to get together and learn with other people, with new friends and new faces. There's a story, actually, this is not connected to what we're talking about, but it's just coming up naturally for me right now. There's a story about a Hasidic Rebbe named Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, known as the Vitebsker. That's what they often refer to the Rebbes by the name of the city and add the ER at the end or whatever, the Vitebsker, right? So they say there's a story that he was sitting with in a situation very similar to this. That's why it's coming up to mind for me. It's just Jews getting together and learning and trying to connect. And he all of a sudden got up and he opened the window and he stuck his head out the window and he took a deep breath through his nose, like as if he's like smelling something. And he came back and sat down and shook his head to the whole crowd. And he said, "He's not here yet. Messiah is not here yet." So the obvious question that, every good story has one guy who's like willing to ask the chutzpahdik question, So the one, otherwise we wouldn't have, we would never have the good story. So one chutzpahdik guy says to the Rebbe, with all due respect, why did you have to put your head outside the window to tell if Mashiach came or not? Why couldn't you do it from here? So he said, because here sitting with you, trying to grow together, trying to connect, learning Torah, being with a group like this, Mashiach is here. So I smelled that Mashiach is here in the air when I was sitting with you. What I was checking was, did Mashiach come for the whole world already? Or is it just in this environment of this chevra, of this gathering of Jews together to learn? So I had to check outside. So what I realized outside, unfortunately, is no, he didn't come for the world yet. But here, he's here. He's here. And that just, I wasn't planning on sharing this story, but it's coming up very naturally. It's beautiful to see people coming out to get together and the camaraderie that I can already sense of everybody, the way that you all greet each other. It's like a very family, beautiful feeling. It's a really beautiful thing. It's the taste of Mashiach. That's what it's going to take. This feeling is what it's going to taste like when Mashiach comes for the whole world. But it's going to feel like that all the time. And that's what we're waiting for and yearning for. Okay, so what I hoped to share a little bit, just to quickly introduce myself. So I'm primarily what I work as, my day job, my regular job is I'm a therapist. I have a private group practice in Lincolnwood, near West Rogers Park, where I live. And one of the areas that I work a lot with is the psychology of relationships and trying to help people develop deeper and more meaningful, connected relationships. And so this book that I wrote, was the idea that kind of came up for me over the course of doing that work, I guess because of the fact that I spend a lot of time helping people in their relationships, but I also have a, rabbinic background. At some point I was functioning more in a rabbi capacity. And so what I realized is that so much of the work is really the same. It's just a question of what relationship are we focused on? The rabbi's job is also to be a relationship builder between each individual person and God. And the therapist's job is to be a relationship builder between the person and their spouse, or the person and themselves, or the person and whoever else it is that they're trying to develop that relationship with. And what I started to realize is that the wisdom of both of those tracks is really the exact same thing. It's so parallel. And the wisdom that psychology has developed to help people create closer connections, more meaningful connections that can have longevity and sustainability in a way that's meaningful and that actually fills people up with all the good love and meaningful connection that they want. All the principles and tools that the psychology of relationships has developed is all in Judaism for how we have a relationship with God. But sometimes to see it in Judaism, we need the lens that emerges through other disciplines, and that helps us be able to find it within Judaism. And so what I did in this book, and a lot of what I'm trying to share and share this message in as many capacities and contexts as I can, is how do we develop a deeper relationship with God in a way that's a real relationship? That God isn't just out there. He's not just some concept or some philosophical equation where, well, how do we know God exists? Well, because I can give you, I remember in college, I had a professor, in college, I majored in philosophy. And I remember there was a philosophy professor brilliant guy, just absolutely off the charts brilliant. And he had, I forgot what it was, I'm making up this number, but somewhere in the ballpark of like in 176 step proof to the existence of God. It's like, wow, okay, that's really cool. I'm really interested. There's no way I'm able to follow it, but thank you. That sounds amazing. But even if that works, and even if it holds up, but what does God mean to you then? He's the result of some like proof, right? He's the result of an equation. So I know that God, there must be a creator to that's okay. There must be a creator to the world. And so now God is a proposition, it's a concept, it's an idea, versus what it means to actually really have a relationship with God. That God is here, he's in my life. And the way that I'm thinking about this these days, and I enjoy the fact that my thoughts and what goes on for me kind of changes all the time. So I'm just sharing with you what's going on right now. God willing, I'll come back in a couple of years. It'll be something completely different. But this is where things are right now, is something called attachment theory. Anyone familiar with attachment theory in psychology? So attachment theory says the following, and this is what my book is based on, as it's called Attached. Attachment theory says this. There was an individual named Abraham Maslow. Maybe people have heard of him. Wonderful individual. He contributed a lot of really beautiful things to society. One of his most famous contributions is what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Most organizations and school settings and societal structures still function with Maslow's hierarchy of needs as their guiding principle. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says the following. There's two basic assumptions or claims that he has. The first is that people develop in sequential stages. There's kind of rungs on a ladder. There's a hierarchy. You start at the bottom of the pyramid and you grow from there. So you have to meet the needs that are at the bottom of the pyramid. And from there, you go up to the next rung. And then from there, when you meet those, you go up to the next and to the next. And so that's point number one, is that there's this hierarchy that's sequential. Point number two is that he actually tells you what that hierarchy is. And he tells you, according to his theory of human development, that the bottom hierarchy, the bottom level of the pyramid of the hierarchy, the first rung of the ladder, is our basic physical needs, which is probably what all of us would think of. Food, shelter, warmth, physical safety, health, etc. Those, what we would think of as basic needs. When a person has those basic needs, they can then ascend, they can climb to the next rung on the ladder, which is the development of moral thinking, of value-based thinking, of ideas. And then they can also, in that middle, I'm simplifying a little bit, but in that middle area, they also develop relationships and they look for relationships. When a person meets those needs, so they have the first basic level of the basic needs, food, shelter, physical safety, etc., then they climb towards relationships and values, etc. And then they climb to the pinnacle, to the top of the pyramid, which is self-actualization and creativity, fulfillment in the world by output of my ideas and myself and what I bring to the table, and the manifestation of that. That's his hierarchy, okay? Most places still operate with that hierarchy. Most people still think with that hierarchy. And I've read a little bit in like the personal life of Abraham Maslow. So I happen to really have a real affection for him. I'm very fond of him as an individual. If you read about him, he's just a very beautiful person. Like, he really just had a charm and a sweetness, and his head was in such the right place. So I always feel bad saying this, but he made a huge mistake and it's a big problem. And we're all making this mistake all the time. Maybe not any of you, but most people. The mistake is that he didn't include relationships on the bottom rung of the pyramid. That the bottom layer didn't include relationships. He put it as a second step. What attachment theory developed and understood through a variety of studies, which I'm not going to bore you with and give you, I mean, some of them are actually kind of interesting, the ways that they prove this, the ways they show this, but I'm not going to go through the details of it. But what attachment theory shows is that relationships actually exist at every single level of the pyramid. That no level of the pyramid has any significance to the human system if it doesn't have relationships in it also. So a person can physically have, and there's really unbelievable, not in a positive sense, but in a literal sense, like unbelievable studies and examples of how a person can have all their basic needs met and yet they're physically unwell and unhealthy with no medical explanation whatsoever. But if they were relationally malnourished and relationally deprived, they're going to be missing. Their system's not interested in the food. So it doesn't actually digest the nutrition and take in the nutrition. Their system's not interested in the safety of their surroundings. So even if everything's perfectly safe, they don't feel safe. Because our most basic, fundamental, essential need as human beings is the need for connection and companionship and relationship, is to experience life. That's why this is such a heartwarming environment, is to experience life in a shared experience with others. That is our most essential basic human need on all levels. So you can have the self-actualization of being an entrepreneur with some incredible creative ideas that come to actualization and manifest and are successful at the top of Maslow's pyramid. But if it's not joined with a relationship, it's not going to be satisfying. You can have the middle levels, you can have the bottom, whatever levels you have, whatever level it is, if it's not accompanied by relationship, the human system is not interested. It doesn't hit the spot. David Brooks, actually, well-known author, wrote a beautiful book on this I highly recommend called The Second Mountain. And he has a TED Talk, which is a short version of the book that I really highly recommend. It's only like 10, 15 minutes, but he talks very openly in a very vulnerable way about how he was at the height of his career success, and was miserable, and it was all because of how lonely he had become. He had what he calls work friends, but no life friends. And he had recently gotten divorced, and his kids had all gone off to college. And so he was really completely alone. And he talks about what he calls the cultural lie of professional success as being the be all and end all of what we're looking for. Because really what we're all looking for is relationships. When we have relationships, all that other stuff is amazing. Not taking away from any of it, the self-actualization, the creativity, career success, etc., whatever those things might be. Obviously, the basic needs of food and shelter and physical safety, all those things are essential and incredibly important. But if they're not accompanied by relationships, then they're actually missing the fundamental thing we need. That's attachment theory. What I think and believe is that Judaism is about attachment theory. Judaism is about the idea and the possibility of not only cultivating those relationships and that need for companionship and connection with other people, but also being able to have that relationship with a being that is the most perfectly loving being, caring being, and ever-present being. Because relationships always have limitations with other people because we're finite. They're bound by time and space, and they're imperfect all the time, which doesn't take away anything from them. The idea of introducing God as a possibility is not to diminish the importance of the human relationships. It actually bolsters it and complements it. But what I think all of Judaism is actually about one thing. It's about having a relationship with God. It's about being able to live life in a shared experience with God. That God provides what they call in attachment theory, what they call secure attachment. God is our ultimate secure attachment when we have proper conceptions of God. That's a big caveat or condition, because so often our understandings of what religion is or what God is actually very often, unfortunately not a secure attachment. Oftentimes it's actually a very insecure attachment. It's very punitive, or it's very distant, neglecting, angry, things of that nature. And then it actually creates an insecure attachment. But what religion, what Judaism is actually about is offering each person the possibility of an attachment like no other. The attachment to God, who is present everywhere and always, and unconditionally present for a person to share their life with. That's why I called the book Attached, because it's a play on attachment theory and the mitzvah in the Torah of what the pasuk says, what the verse says in the Torah of ledavka bo, which means to attach to him, to attach to God. And many, many, many sources write that the purpose of the entirety of the Torah, of all 613 commandments, of all the different, and we'll get back to that word commandment in a second, of all the different aspects of Judaism, are really all aimed towards one goal, which is relationship with God and attachment to God. And that's what we call dveikus or dveikut, which means attachment. Like glue in Hebrew is devek, to attach something. We have a commandment, we have an opportunity, an instruction to be attached to God in that way, the way that attachment theory talks about. Now, for a lot of people, this is very difficult to do because our conception of Judaism is so often based on translations. Translations are a very fragile endeavor because everything is always lost in translation. Because translation means that you're choosing one narrow aspect of what's actually happening. So I'm curious, just to put this out there, how people would translate a few words. If you don't know, that's totally okay. But I'm just curious, some of the words that are very commonly associated with Jewish practice. A word like halacha, how would you translate that? Law, Jewish law. Good. So that's the typical translation that 99.9% of people would give. Law, Jewish law. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. How would you translate mitzvah? Commandment. Good. You guys are on track so far. Good. 99.9% of people would say that.
You're setting us up though.
Yes, of course. But actually, I'm not setting you up to be wrong. And this is an important part, which I'll explain what I mean in a second, but just to I'm not setting you up to be wrong. Those translations are not wrong. The problem with translation, the reason I say it's a fragile endeavor is not because it's wrong, it's because it's not the full picture. Because it's in its original context, a word can mean something very multidimensional. It can be very rich in its meaning. And when you translate it, by definition, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to pick a word that's going to be as parallel to the real thing as possible, but it's an imitation, in which case it automatically is narrowing what it actually means. So those definitions are true. They're absolutely true, but they're not the full picture. They're narrow slices of what the words actually mean. Okay, we're gonna keep going, setting you up though for a second. Okay, those are two very common words. Let's say the next couple of words. The word asur or usur, typically translated as prohibited. Okay, so if something is usur, it means it's prohibited. You know, can I do this on Shabbos, right? Can I do whatever it might be? So usur is like the law says, you know, the halacha, the law says it's usur means it's prohibited. That's the typical way people would translate it. As opposed to, so muktzah is an example of something that's usur. Muktzah actually in its real context is a specific aspect of something that is prohibited to do on Shabbos. But but you're right, it's one example of something that's usur. Okay. The contrast to usur is mutter, which means permitted. So like if somebody asks, you know, a rabbi a question like, can I do this? It would be like usur or mutter, you know, prohibited or permitted, right? Those are all the typical translations, yeah, of some base, you know, classic kind of phrases or words in Jewish practice. I want to just show you something though for a second. Don't be overwhelmed by this. We're not reading any of this inside. I want to show you something. Here, if you could just take one and pass.
Share.
Yeah, you could share. We're not going through any of this. I want to just show you something.
Sure.
Oh, my God. There's no way.
So this, what I just handed out to you is a page from a typical classic text called the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the basic book of Jewish law of halacha, the basic book of halacha. Oh, thank you. It's the basic book of halacha that if a person's studying Jewish law about any topic, this would be their basic go-to. This is the classic text. Okay. Now, one of the things, this is not our topic for tonight, but one of the things that's incredibly unique, just say this, I'm putting this in brackets, yeah, just tangentially, so I'm going to say it quickly. One of the things that I think is really cool to look at is, so if you see in the middle, the top middle of the page, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, the top middle. That's the only part of the page that's actually the Shulchan Aruch. That's actually the author of this primary text. The rest of it is all commentaries. Okay, so how many commentaries are on this page? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, 12 commentaries on the same page. Now, again, this is not our topic for tonight. I'm putting this in brackets. That is incredibly unique. That's incredibly unique. My impression, I'm not a scholar of all, disciplines and religions. I can't say for sure, but my strong impression is that that is incredibly unique to Judaism. That you have, and this is typical. This is not something, uncommon. This is typical. That you will have, and they're all arguing with each other, by the way, right? That you have 12 views printed because, there's a line in marketing, the medium is the message, right? This is not by coincidence that this is typical traditional way that a Jewish text is printed. And it's very unique that you'll have 12 views on the same page. Because what it's really expressing, the medium is the message, what it's really expressing is that what Judaism really believes in is a very multidimensional way of thinking about the world and thinking about life. It's a dialectical way of thinking, that things aren't this or that. It's not binaries. We have 12 opinions who are all in conversation with each other, specifically on the same page. Not that they're in different books responding to each other, which is the way that most disciplines operate. Right? When I was studying philosophy, people were arguing with each other also. Philosophers argue, never seen a text like this ever. It's always different books responding to each other, right? But the point is that they're all on the same page. Okay, that's bracketed for another time. But what I want to show you is some of the names. So this is a classic book of halacha, okay? Halacha meaning law. This is something that a person would normally look at and think about as being something technical, permitted, prohibited, this you can do, this you can't do. If you do it this way, if this is the case, then it's going to be like this. But if it's this way, then it's going to be this, right? Very technical, very legal, okay? But I want to tell you what some of the names of these texts are, what the authors decided to name their texts. So first of all, the primary text here is called Shulchan Aruch. You know what that means? It means the set table, the table that is set and laid out before you. Already, not the most technical, dry sounding thing. It's a little bit intriguing what that means, why he would call it that. It's based on an earlier source. Another work here, the one on the right, is called the Turei Zahav, which means pillars of gold. The one on the left is called Magen Avraham, which means the shield of Abraham. This one's not on the page in this context, but he's very often on the page, is what's called the Sifsei Kohen, which means the priestly lips. Another piece here is called Sha'arei Tshuva, which means gates of return. Another one is called Ateres Zekenim, which means crowns of wisdom or crowns of elders. Another is called Pri Megadim, which means fresh fruits or delicacies. Another is Eshel Avram, which is a particular type of tree of Abraham. Those titles don't sound like 20th century tort law, right? If you Google like classic law school reading, the titles of those books are not going to sound like the titles of the books I just read to you in Jewish law, right? They're going to sound, I did this as an experiment to make sure that what I'm saying is true. I Googled, I didn't go to law school, I Googled to chat, they all sound something like 20th century tort law, something like that, There's a reason why these names don't sound so dry and technical. It's because halacha is not just law. That's a narrow translation. Halacha actually comes from the root word of halach, hey lamed chaf, which means walk. So halacha is actually a difficult word to translate, but it means something to do with walking or pathway. A mahalech is a path. Halacha, halicha is walking. Halacha means some sort of pathway. Pathway to what? Well, I think it's pathway to connection. Because all of halacha, all of Jewish practice is actually about one thing, connecting with God. Mitzvah is typically translated based on the root word of sivoy, which is commandment, which is why we typically translate it that way. But that's also a narrow translation. It's a true translation, just like law is also, because law is conduct, which has to do with walking. The way you walk is your conduct. It's a true translation. It's just narrow. Mitzvah is translated as commandment from that word, sivoy, but actually there's another word that it's connected to, which is tsevet. You know what tsevet is in the army, in the Israeli army? Tsevet is a battalion or a group. I don't know exactly which size of the group, a battalion or what platoon. I don't know exactly the details, but it's a tsevet. Tsevet means joining. It means connection. So mitzvah actually, in addition to commandment, mitzvah means connection. To create a connection. By the way, parallel, the word religion. And you know what it actually means? It's from Latin. I don't know how to pronounce this. Please don't laugh at me, but the word religio or something like that. So that word in Latin actually, outside. So that word in Latin actually also means to join. The word religion actually means to join or to bind. I mean, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Sherry.
So mitzvah is connection, which is why there's a beautiful teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of what we think of as Hasidus. The Baal Shem Tov taught that it says in Pirkei Avos, in chapters of our fathers, it says schar mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. Okay, so now if you translate the word mitzvah as connection, what does that line mean? It means the reward of connection is connection. And that's exactly what attachment theory teaches. Because the fundamental mistake we make sometimes is thinking that relationships are a means towards an end of other things. Right? In the world of psychology before attachment theory, what they thought was that the reason children cling to their parents is because their parents provide them with their needs. What attachment theory came and showed through a variety of studies is the reason children cling to their parents is because they cling to their parents. It's for the relationship. It's actually for the relationship. Yes, they also need the other things, but it's for the relationship itself. The reason there's marriage in the world is not because it's not just because of the fact that it can create some sort of mutual beneficial construct of how to live. I can provide this and you can provide this. It's because we need connection. Right? I would imagine the reason we come here beyond anything else is because of the connection. Schar mitzvah means that the reward of connection is the connection, nothing else. It's the connection itself. It's the ability to be in the shared experience in companionship. A couple of other words I mentioned before. Mutter and asr, permitted and prohibited, are also not the best translations. They're narrow. The word asr actually means closed, like a jail in Hebrew is a beit ha'asurim. It means closed. Mutter, lahatir, to untie a knot. In Hebrew would be lahatir, would be to open. Mutter means open. So what does it mean when we say something is permitted or something is prohibited? What it means is it open or is it closed? What does that mean, open or closed? It means, is this thing an opening for connection? If so, go ahead. It's an opening for connection to God. The things that are usher, that are prohibited in Judaism, it's not just like God gave us this list of restrictions that are just, these confining constrictions. He's telling us which things in this world are open for the possibility of connection to him, which of them are pathways. It's in halacha, pathway. Which are the open pathways and which are the closed pathways. That's what halacha is. It's telling you what's mutter and what's asr, what's permitted and what's prohibited, but it's not because we have a list of prohibitions, etc. It's because there are certain things that God is saying to you, this is not where you find me in connection. Your spouse saying to you, this is not what I find meaningful. You can do this thinking you're connecting, but this is not meaningful. This is not where there's an opening for connection. And the things that are mutter these are the things that are open for connection. This is where we can connect. And the mitzvot, the commandments, are the things that have inherent connection. So it's almost like there's these three different things, right? Mitzvah, mutter, and asr. Things that have inherent connection to God, things that have the possibility of connection to God, and things that are automatically not connectors to God. And that's what all of Jewish practice is about. It's all about creating the attachment to God, to be able to have that lived, shared experience with him, which is a profoundly, I could just speak for myself, it's a profoundly life-changing way of living. You know, I grew up religious, but I didn't grow up with what I just told you. And I think my parents lived what I just told you, so it's not a critique on them. They, I think, live this, but I don't think I understood this. So I grew up with a list of things. I grew up with permitted, prohibited commandments. You know, I grew up with law. I grew up with all that, but I didn't grow up with this. And even when I became interested in religion on my own and in Judaism on my own, and I started taking it more seriously, it still wasn't for this reason. It wasn't to create a relationship of living my life in connection with God. It was because it maybe adds meaning. It was because of a variety of different reasons that I understood, you know, either conceptual reasons or things like that. It's only in the past few years that religion, that Judaism has become about this for me. And I can just tell you for myself, I don't know for anybody else, but for myself, it's life-changing. To live life in a way that I'm living in relationship with God. Okay, do we have time for me to do one last piece to this? Is that okay? Am I going too long?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we make this real now? How do we live this?
Stick around.
What do you say?
If you promise to stick around once you're done.
Sure.
Yeah.
Already asked
Are we having a
This is
sleepover?
like how- I know.
You'll be out of here by midnight at the latest.
Sounds good. Dana can go back to
Yeah.
okay, so how do we like make this real though? Like I think it's a nice concept. I hope it's a nice concept. But like, how do you live that? How do you make that like personal to you and make that real to you? So has anyone heard of Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages? This is a very typical, you know, widespread book people recommend in marriages and things like that. It has a really nice, some really nice wisdom and insight to it. I'll tell you just a quick summary of it, so to make sure we're all on the same page. What Chapman, his idea was the following. His novel idea was the following. He was a marriage therapist, and he said that he experienced so many times that he'd be sitting here. We have a lovely couple here who came to me for therapy. No, and, no.
And do that.
What do you say?
You may yet do that.
Well, if you do that, I won't be able to make that joke because HIPAA. But so the two people in the relationship sitting right there, this is beautiful. And what he said he noticed many times. What he noticed many times was that he would hear one individual saying, "I don't understand. My wife tells me that I don't show her love and I don't make her feel loved, but I try so hard to show her love. I buy her presents on a consistent basis. I try to leave her cards on a consistent basis. I try and do all these different types of things. I work to provide right now. Now it's all coming out, right? I work really hard to provide for our whole family. I work extra. I push myself to work overtime and to create more financial comfort for our family. These are all ways that I show her love, and she's always complaining that she doesn't feel loved. But I buy her gifts, I write her cards, and I work as hard as I possibly can to provide." And then the wife says, "And I don't understand because my husband says I don't care about him, but I make him dinner every night. I try to take care of the house. I try and I don't know, whatever the example would be, right? Take care of the kids. Yeah. What do you say? I do the laundry. Yeah. Add in whatever, throw in whatever everybody wants. Shopping, cleaning, right? Maybe some not as gender stereotypical things also, whatever we want it to be. Yeah. Throw it in there, right? Typical scenario. And she said, "I don't understand because I do all these things." And he says he doesn't feel like I care about him. And I don't get it. And he said he would see something like that, some version of that over and over and over and over again. And what he developed is the following idea. He said he realized both people were trying to say, I love you, but they were speaking languages that the other one didn't understand. So the husband can be saying, I love you in French, and his wife doesn't speak French and doesn't even know what that would be. And she's saying, I love you in Spanish, and he doesn't speak Spanish and doesn't know what that means. And what he said is that in the way that we express love, we can broadly categorize it into 5 categories. 5 what he calls languages, 5 love languages. The first is words of affirmation. So speaking words of love, of affection, of compliments, etc. That's yours. The second is acts of service, is doing something for the person. So that would be something like making dinner, doing an errand for the other person, right? Knowing there's something they have on a to-do list and taking care of it for them, right? Things of that nature. The third is quality time. Quality time, it means spending quality time together, undistracted, one-on-one presence, whatever activity will be involved, but it's quality time together. Could be doing nothing, could be doing something, but it's undivided attention of quality time together. The fourth is physical touch, which can include sexual touch, but means broader, intimate touch, physical affection of any form in that way, physical touch. And the fifth is is gifts. So giving gifts, explanatory. Yeah, good.
You want a piece of paper to pen out?
What was it?
Good.
First words of, what was it?
Words of affirmation. Okay, so words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, physical touch, and gifts.
Could you go into more than one category?
Yes. So here's his point. So what Gary Chapman said is what he thinks is that everyone has a primary language that makes them feel love. Most people also have a strong secondary. Some people have all, you are in luck if your spouse is high on all 5 languages. You just hit the jackpot because it makes your life so much easier, right? So much easier. But most people are not that way. Most people have one primary and, another couple that are meaningful. And then the other 1 or 2 are just not really, they mean something, but it's not really it's not gonna create a spark for them, right? So usually there's one, typically, So what he said is that what he thinks happens is people have their own language of what feels meaningful to them, and understandably, they naturally just do that for their spouse. But that might not be their spouse's language. And so his whole methodology of the way that he started to, based on this idea that he discovered, is what he tried to do is to develop the awareness of love languages, to identify what is your language, and to share that with your spouse so that they can now try and speak their love for you in a language that actually hits home and is meaningful, and vice versa. And recognizing that we have different languages, which can sometimes be incredibly challenging, right? I've worked there's one couple that I always laugh remembering this because it was her love language, top of the pyramid, was if her husband would fill her car up with gas. If she would get to her car and he just, without being asked, would take it to the gas station and fill it up. And he was like, but that's not love. That's just an errand. That can't be. And he was so frustrated. He wanted to lay out roses on her bed and whatever. And that's what she wanted. And it was so hard to get them to speak the same language, right? So it can be challenging, but so that's the idea, okay? So my thought is this: Judaism has a very wide gamut of mitzvos, which we now know means forms of connection with each other, with us to God, right? Of creating actions that are connecting actions. There's a statement, a very well-known statement that says the following. Hananiah ben Akasha Omer, there was someone named Hananiah, the son of Akasha. He used to say, Ratzah, I don't know a lot of things by heart. This is just something that they say in shul after, like before mincha, like almost every day. So it's one of those things you pick up on. Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'zakos es Yisrael. God wanted to give the Jewish people merit. Lefichach, therefore, hir balehem Torah u'mitzvos. He gave them a lot of mitzvos. So the question that a lot of people ask is, well, he wanted to give them merit, so he gave them a lot of mitzvos, but that sets them up for the possibility of falling short. But what's explained in the commentaries is God made so many different ways of connecting with him because he made it that each person, each soul has a different way of connecting with him. And so he made it that there's a wide array. And the whole gamut is for everybody, but each person has something in there that's their thing, that's their love language. That when they speak love in this language, they feel lit up. Right? The way that when I was going through the love languages, different people at different points, right? When I was just saying them, at different ones, examples I was giving, a different face I would see would go, oh, that, that's, yeah. And that's right. The way you light up because when it's the speaking the language, that's your language, you get lit up. And so God, when it says, L'zakos es Yisrael, he wanted to light up the Jewish people. He wanted to give us the ability to light up with the feeling of love and connection to God. And so he gave us all these different practices and rituals so that we can find the one or the group that really speaks to us. And I think, so there's throughout Jewish history, there's been a tradition of what's called Monei HaMitzvos, commentaries that count the different mitzvos and categorize them. So sometimes they're categorized by things that, there's a section of what is between you and God and a section of what's between you and other people. There's a different way of categorizing them as the rational mitzvot versus the irrational mitzvot, those that come from revelation, only from revelation. There's other ways of categorizing them as the prohibitions versus the proactive, positive commandments. There's all different ways of categorizing them. I want to humbly suggest a new categorization of all of the Jewish practice. The new categorization is the love languages, because all of mitzvahs are love languages. They are our love language between us and God. If anybody's ever read or seen the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs is all about this. It's the love story. It's an incredibly passionate love story between the Jewish people and God, chasing each other in desire for connection. And all of the mitzvot are these love languages. So if you think about it, let's just think about this together. So let's go through the different languages. Words of affirmation. Where do we have that in Jewish practice? Most obviously,
Every morning.
prayer. Yeah, you wake up and you say Moda'ani, that's right there. That's words of affirmation. It's words of us affirming God, and it's also us hearing God affirm us. And God woke me up this morning, he gave me this, and I'm affirming that he's the king. That words of affirmation is the very first thing we do. And we make blessings all the time. These are words of affirmation. Blessed are you, God. And in prayer, we are constantly talking about our love for God. And we're also constantly reading God express his love for us. So much of the prayer is focused on, almost the entirety of prayer is focused on those two things, those two directions of expressions of love. That's words of affirmation. And in the Hasidic tradition, there's an idea of taking words of affirmation or prayer way beyond the rituals of the prayer book. What's called hitbodedut or hispodedus, which means talking to God like your friend. Yeah?
Yeah, I love it.
Yes. Yeah. Just talking to God. Just talking to God. Just talking. You're walking, you're what do you say?
I got a good parking space today. I said thank you, Hashem.
Exactly. I was driving here and I tried to just talk to God a little bit, to ask him to help me be able to find the right words, to say the right thing. Just simple, just regular life. Where is God is in your regular life. It's not a 176 step proof to prove God exists. God is in my speaking to him. That's the proof. The proof is in the experience of actually just talking. That's words of affirmation. What's the next one? We can go in any order. Quality time. Quality time, that's Shabbos. It's all the holidays. Undivided time, me and God. It's also hispodidus, right? It's secluding myself with God, making time to just be with God. Put my phone away, put other things away, and to just spend time. That's what the Hebrew word for holidays is moed. Moed means a designated time, or it's a meeting place. It's quality time with God. So certainly Shabbos and all the holidays are quality time, but we can also create that quality time on a regular day in any way. The next one is physical touch. This one you would think is harder to come by when it comes to God, right? Because how do you have physical touch with God? But even this, we have mezuzahs on the door, and it's a common practice to kiss the mezuzah. That's our physical touch with God, right? And so many other examples.
Yeah. And what about the whole world, like touching a tree or smelling?
100%, and notice and feeling the connection. And actually, if you think about it, most of our rituals are very sensory experiences. Sukkot, you go into a sukkah, and the sources talk about how the walls of the sukkah are God's arm embracing you, right? That's why it's 2 walls and a minimum third, because it's the 3 parts of our arm. It's God's embrace, right? It's a physical touch experience. You make Havdalah, and there's spices, and there's wine, and there's a candle. It's a full physical touch experience in this moment of intimacy and connection with God. Yeah.
There's also the fact that almost every place you look where there's blessing or prayer, there is a meditation that is connected to a physical act. So you're automatically connecting the physical with the intellectual, the spiritual.
Yes, 100%. We also have a very common practice of giving a kiss to svarim, to holy books. Right? There's an amazing story that my mentor, Rabbi Moshe Weinberger, tells about this, and I'm wrapping up. I'm sorry, I don't know what time it is even.
You'll be 40, you almost like 10 minutes.
I don't know how long somebody could listen to me talk for us.
Keep going. We got the spell.
He tells this story about, there was a great, if you're catching on, I like Hasidus a lot, so you keep hearing me mention that and quoting that. There was a great Hasidic teacher and leader known as the Beis Yakov. That was the name of his. Hasidic teachers are either known by the city, like Vitebsk we started with, or the name of their primary book. So this one's primary book is called the Beis Yakov. So he was known as the Beis Yakov. So there was an individual who supposedly, so what do you say?
Of its time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a book.
It's a book. It's not his name, exactly right. It's very, very common. So the Beis Yaakov used to give a Talmud class for elite select students every night from 12 to 4 in the morning, supposedly. That's what they say. Some of these people were they're functioning on a different level. So they used to give this class 12 to 4 every night. There was an individual who went through, I don't remember if he was a Holocaust survivor or just somebody who went through a very, very challenging life of hardships. And he was in that class. And later in life, he was asked, like, how did you remain faithful through all the challenging times? And how did you hold yourself up and optimism and live with vibrancy despite the amount of challenges you endured? And he said, I was in the class of the Beis Yaakov back in the day from 12 to 4 every morning. And he said, I don't remember very much of what we actually learned. But the thing that got me through all these years is that at the end of the class, the Beis Yaakov would close his volume of Talmud and he would give it a kiss. And the way that he kissed that Talmud, that image and that affection and that connection to a higher being and to have a relationship with God, that kiss was etched in me, and that's what I remembered, and that is what kept me for all those years. That's physical touch. Right? And we do have physical touch with God. And what did I say so far? So words of affirmation, physical touch, quality time.
Gifts is left.
So gifts and acts of service are left, and you could think, everyone can think creatively for themselves. Personally, I group them together. The way in the context of God, not in the context of religion, but in the context of relationship with God, I group them together. And the way I think about them is like this: there's a category of mitzvot and halacha in Judaism that's called chukim. Chok is the parts of Judaism that we don't understand. But I think a chok is not only something that we don't understand the reason for. I think the way that I think about a chok is it's aspects of our Jewish life that we don't like. And every single person has that. Anyone who's being honest, doesn't matter how religious they are, doesn't matter what they look like, everyone has the parts of their Jewish life, if they're being honest, that they don't find inspiring. They don't find meaningful. That's like, why is this what God wants? You know, like this is not meaningful to me. And when a person is able to say, I'm gonna do what my spouse wants, even when it's not meaningful to me at all. In the example I gave you before, when the husband says, okay, I will fill up my wife's car with gas because that's what makes her feel loved, even if I can't feel anything romantic or loving about that, in some ways, that's actually the biggest expression of love. Because then what he's showing his wife is that it's not about me. It's not all about me and what I find inspiring and what I find meaningful. It's actually about you. I'm actually listening to you. I'm actually hearing you. I'm actually paying attention to what you actually want. It's not just that I'm fulfilling what it is that I want by kind of using you as the way that I can play that out. I'm actually hearing you. And of course, the ideal is when what we find meaningful and the other person finds meaningful converge. That's obviously, in some way, that's the best experience. But there's something uniquely profound and meaningful. And there's something that's an even more powerful expression of love when I'm willing to do something for someone that I don't find any inspiration or meaning or connection in. And I'm doing it only because I'm actually seeing you and caring about you. And when it comes to God, everyone has the things that they don't find meaningful and inspiring in Jewish life. And so for what each individual person, whatever that is for you, that's the love language of what I would group together in this context as acts of service and gifts. It's the act of service or the gift that we give to God, saying it's not only about me, it's actually also about you. And so I'm willing to do the thing that you say is meaningful to you, even if it doesn't resonate with me, it doesn't create that spark or light me up. So, yeah.
I just have a question about
Yes.
this because I think that something that we do here a lot at L'Chaim Center is kind of, baby steps. We're always talking about baby steps.
Mhm.
So maybe something with God, like I'm taking this for me personally.
Mhm.
If I add a little something into my tradition or something to do that might not have meaning at first, and I feel like I'm doing it for God, and I feel like I hope for that connection with God, then eventually I would feel connected.
Yes.
But it might not start off
Right.
with me having
Right.
love.
100%.
At all. It
You're
might
100%
take
right.
Months for me to
Yeah.
get what I'm looking for out of
Right.
it.
100%. And sometimes what I think a person can find meaning in is what I just said. Meaning, even when I don't find meaning, but I'm doing it because of that itself, the lack of meaning can be reframed as the source of meaning. That's what I'm
Can you say that
suggesting.
again?
The lack of meaning can itself be reframed as a source of meaning. Because the fact that I'm willing to do this without having any meaning for me, that can be a source of being meaningful. Right? So that's a different way of looking at it. But so that's my kind of twist of it. But on a more simple level, I'd also completely agree with you. And what you just said is what the Jewish people said and were praised for at Mount Sinai. They said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and then we will understand. We will find the meaning from the experience. And I think that what I'm talking about now, of something being meaningful or not being meaningful, is dynamic. It's not static. It can change. So the thing that can be an act of service, if we think about it in this way, something that starts as an act of service for God because I don't find it meaningful, but I'm taking that baby step, like you said, can eventually actually turn into quality time, or can turn into words of affirmation because eventually it might actually shift into something meaningful, even if in the beginning it wasn't. I think it can be dynamic. It can evolve over time. So absolutely, I think that's true.
You know, it makes me think of a little bit, it's a little different, but the same, is when you bury somebody, it's the most selfless act, right? Because they can't repay
Right.
that act.
Right.
And you're never gonna, you don't get something back from that person,
Right.
but you get a lot out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you actually, like you're saying, in some way, what you get out of it is so meaningful because you get nothing out of it, which is what you get out of it,
Yeah.
right? That's the paradox. That's what I'm talking about. So the lack of meaning becomes the source of meaning in that way. Yeah, exactly. And I think so. So to me, that would be the category, the language of gifts or acts of service to God.
It kind of goes, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, is my hierarchy of needs. The final one is altruism. And so that
Yeah,
example
yeah.
that Steve just did is an example of
Yes,
altruism.
yeah, it's ultimately, yeah, absolutely.
Someone just mentioned that somebody did a class on the 5 love languages with the Shema.
Oh,
Do you do
interesting.
that?
No,
Okay.
I would love to hear that. I never, yeah.
Okay, you'll think of it on the car ride home.
Okay, yeah.
Got to circle back to them.
And if you, that's cool. That's very cool. I never thought I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that the other side of what you're saying, it all kind of ties together. If you start with a presumption that the architecture of being a human being is such that the individual isolated ego is the basic obstacle to a sense of connection and wholeness.
Yeah.
And that ties to what I think is a key part of the Jewish mission, which is building community, actually establishing relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that ties together most of what you're saying.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
in effect, what's happened is the way we're constructed is it's limited in terms of the feeling, our ability to sense what it is to be alive, unless we are actively involved in getting affirmation, getting feedback, getting a connection to the other.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of something else too about this, and that is when you talk about love, you're really talking about the capacity to love yourself. That the relationship to God is the template that we're given to tell us how we actually make a connection to our fellow human beings. And loving somebody else is a way of saying that you have included that person in something that's essential in you, that loving them is just a form of loving yourself, having full regard for them.
Yeah, I think it's all reciprocal. So love for myself, love for another person, and love for God. I don't know, what comes first, I think that they somehow all when done well, they all feed off each other positively. When unfortunately not in the right way, they all feed off each other negatively. They are all intertwined. I actually talk about that a bunch in the end of the book, how people who have had probably insecure human relationships, that becomes projected onto their conceptions of God and create insecure relationships with God, whether overly anxious or overly avoidant. But I don't know what the order is. I don't know if there's an exact science to the order, but I think what you're saying is exactly true. They're all folded into each other, those 3 different relations: love for self, love for other, and love for God.
But your reference to hooks, though, is kind of a window into answering that question, because we're practicing something that we don't really relate to, that we don't understand, as the model that we try to use and go. So we have to start with God, and that's the stable foundation part.
Yeah,
And
I think it's a little bit complex just because I don't know that oftentimes a person doesn't have the capacity to fully go beyond themselves in that way if they don't already have a secure sense of self. So it's almost like the secure sense of self and the love for self is necessary to be able to do that full altruism. But then at the same time, that full altruism is really what gives a person a deeper love for self. So that's what I mean when I say I don't know which one necessarily comes first, because it's kind of tricky in that way, But I think what you're saying is really, really well said. Yeah.
I think we've all met people and had conversations with people about, why don't you come to a Chaim Center? Try davening, I'm a good person. I honor my parents. I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. But the weakness in that argument is they're not doing it for connection to Hashem.
Right.
And so, I would never have the chutzpah to say to someone, hey, it's because, you're doing it for the wrong
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah, me neither.
But
Yeah.
that's the breakdown.
That's exactly right.
As you're
I
saying.
think that's true. I think that's right, right.
I keep thinking about all this, like the crime in Chicago, which is so out of control. And the people who are doing these crimes, they don't have that, any of those
Right,
three.
Right,
It's so
Yeah.
sad to me.
yeah, absolutely. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right, to love your friend like yourself. Embedded in that is the assumption that it's important to love yourself. And sometimes l'reacha is translated as your friend, but actually there are sources that say l'reacha means your friend, means God as your friend. Right, and so it's really all three of these things. It's a triangle of all three: love for self, love for fellow person, and love for God somehow. So
Rabbi,
I
don't
put,
know if
yeah.
anyone online might have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure. If anybody online wants
They can
to
unmute themselves.
unmute yourself, feel free.
Is it your aunt?
What'd you say? My mother-in-law? I don't see her anymore. So I don't know if I scared her
Probably
off.
was.
Or it may not have been her. I don't know.
It's one at a time, it's late.
And then if you want to let them know too, how they can get your book.
Oh, yeah,
if
thank
they're
you.
not here.
So just the last piece. On this page that I handed out, there's a QR code. The QR code takes you to a self-assessment quiz of the 5 love languages to figure out what your language is. My encouragement, both for your person-to-person relationships and also for your Jewish life, your relationship with God, is figure out what your love language is and tell your spouse or significant other people in your life what your love language is.
Is it usually
And
the same
also,
for your, is it usually the same yours and your,
no, very
relationship with
often
God?
it's different. And what? And
Your
your
relationship with God.
So this I don't have any research on. This would be a fascinating study. What I want to offer you is figure out your love language for your relationship, but also take that love language and now make your Jewish life revolve around the parts of Judaism, not to the exclusion of anything else, but make it that's what your focus is on. There's a passage in the Talmud that talks about the rabbis would go up to each other and say, what was your father most passionate about? And he would say, what was your father most passionate? And they each had, this one was tzitzis, and this one was Shabbos, and this one was, because we're supposed to have that. We're supposed to have an aspect of you that lights us up. So figure out what your love language is and make your Jewish life, your relationship with God, revolve around that. So if yours is quality time, make Shabbos and holidays and make quality time on your regular day with God. If yours is love language, is words of affirmation, start talking to God more, like actually talking. If yours is physical touch, so make sure you pause and you give them a good kiss, not just a quick, whatever. And whatever yours is, make your Jewish life revolve around that. And then get back to me to let me know if it was actually the same, because I don't know. That'd be a really interesting study. If your love language with other people is the same as it is with God, I feel strongly that it probably is, but I don't have any evidence to back that. The book is here for sale, if anybody's interested. And for anybody online, the book is called Attached. It's on Amazon. It was probably the easiest place to get it. It's also on Feldheim, but it's on Amazon if you put in Attached and my last name. Thank you all so much for coming. Really a pleasure. I don't have an audiobook, but I do actually, there's brochures here. I also have a podcast with ongoing content of this sort, Psychology and Judaism, that's coming out all the time. So if you want to subscribe to the podcast, I'd love to have you. And you could take a brochure. It has all the information for that as well to hear more of these types of thoughts. The book is $18.
Great. Very good. Thank you very much. Sharon.
Thank you.
Sorry, just, wanted to.
Yeah.
Keep it up to her.
Yeah, I'm gonna get right now.
Do you want to hold it? I'll take a picture of you.
Sure.
Or do you want to sign it for someone?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me give you change.
Okay, I'll do it for her and then she'll do it.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I can give change. I went to the bank and asked for like singles. They actually were like, why do you? Right, exactly.
Yeah, they knew where you were going, and they were wrong.
Can I take a picture with you?
Yes, sure.
AJ will get in there too.
She likes to post.
I know.
Anybody want to get a group picture? I know Judy can't wait to get in front.
Steve will.
Judy, get in here.
Anyone who wants.
AJ, get a book from me.
I got room to be.
My hair is in ponytail. Wait, I want to get mine.
Do you want to hear my friend's my love language is all of that. Get me a gift while you're running errands for me.
Wait, but I'm.
And then
AJ, go
my
in
husband
here.
have money me the entire time. And then do it again every day forever.
We're not gonna. And neither of you, I wasn't gonna get you, but I literally zoomed.
Maybe she's trying to get out of the picture.
Get me a gift while you're running errands for me, and then come home and rub my head for an hour while complimenting me the entire time, and then do it again every day forever. Isn't that great?
Oh, good night, whoever's still here. Thank you so much.
Julie.
Have a good evening. Yes. Oh,
Hey,
hi,
it's
Sarah. Is that Sarah
Will you
talking?
will you ask him what the name of his podcast is?
Sure. I think it's called Attached, just like his book. I have a flyer.
Oh. Okay.
And it says www.attachedliving.com. Must be his website.
Hold on, hold that up. I'm gonna take a picture of that.
It has.
Oh, wait, hang.
That was a lot.
Okay, that's what you're laughing. So if you WhatsApp.
Okay. Thanks,
Okay.
Julie.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks for doing this. It was great.
My love language is
Thank you.
mine's the same, so I could be partner here.